All right, I think we can get going. Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to you all. Welcome to yet another edition of the Imagine 2030 virtual fishbowl panel. I'm very excited to see you all here tonight. Right, before we get going and I introduce you to our amazing speakers, some background information on this event that is proudly brought to you by the Imagine 2030 Accelerator with a focus on measuring impact, what, why, how for tonight's topic. Maybe just a bit of a background information. The Imagine 2030 Accelerator program is proudly brought to you by the ESF, which is the European Social Fund. It's funded by them, but was founded by Sharkbite Innovation in cooperation with Motion Lab Berlin. This program is dedicated to supporting and accelerating young innovative startups that have ideas or projects or concepts that they're working on that hope to reach the UN SDGs of 2030. Hence our name, Imagine 2030, because that is exactly what we're doing. We're on hot pursuit of those goals and we're imagining what 2030 could look like. Right. Having said that, at this point of the evening, I would usually tell you where the emergency exits are and where you'd find your lavatories, but as we are not on a physical event, I do believe that you quite well know where you'd find those in your respective areas. We do have some technicalities that we'd like to share with you as it is a virtual seminar. For your optimal viewing experience, we have a fishbowl panel. A fishbowl panel, much like you'd find it maybe along Clubhouse, is essentially that we have our three awesome speakers here and you get to ask them, it's you, the audience, get to ask them your questions that you may have for them and actively discuss this. So that you can enjoy this experience to the optimal best, I do ask you to please go to your video settings. 1 second. Switch off your video. So could everyone please just turn their videos off, mute themselves, then go to their video settings. You'd find this on the bottom left-hand corner, and then check the hide non-video participant box. In German, it is translated to Teilnehmer ohne Videofunktion verbergen. This will allow you to only view the individuals that have their video on. So much like in the fishbowl panel, you would then see our speakers, myself, and whoever is joining us on stage or our virtual stage in that matter to ask their question. Just so that you know, how do you ask your question? It's very, very simple. You raise your hand and our amazing tech team and my colleagues in the background, Nadine and Teresa, they will check who has raised their hand. Then they will write in the chat box. They'll provide the speaking order for tonight. So when it's up your turn, I will call you upon our virtual stage. You can turn your video on, unmute yourself, and you will have a whole minute. The floor is yours for 1 whole minute to ask your question and discuss with our speakers whatever is on your mind. Having said that, after that 1 minute, I do ask that you please switch off your video again, mute yourself, and give the floor to the next audience member or speaker who would like to comment on that. Again, I'd just like to say, please go to your video settings, bottom left-hand corner, click the hide non-video participant box. In German, it is the Teilnehmer ohne Videofunktion verbergen, and this will give you the optimal viewing experience. If you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to write so in the chat box. My colleagues will be happy to answer those. Right, having said that, let's get to the exciting part. We're here to hear from our amazing speakers and actively discuss with them. Who are these speakers, if you may ask? We are very happy and proud to have Frederic Simon from On Purpose with us here today, Benjamin Mandos from Bag, as well as Young-Jin Choi from Phineo. And as the saying goes, there's no better person to introduce yourself than yourself. I think I'll just hand the floor over to Frederic. Why don't you give us a quick insight as to who you are and what On Purpose is?
Gladly. Thank you very much, Taylor. Glad to be here. Welcome, everyone. Frederic is my name. I'm the managing director of On Purpose Berlin. On Purpose is a social enterprise that connects impact organizations with experienced talent that want to transition their career towards more purpose in their profession. So we not only match the organizations with these people to work together in important impact projects. Apart from that, the people joining us under an extensive learning and development program consisting of professional coaching, mentoring, as well as weekly trainings during this one-year leadership program for the social sector.
That's very, very interesting. Happy to have you here. Thank you, Frederic. Ben, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Benny. I'm the founder of Gutbag. What are we doing? We invented the world's first backpack made from ocean plastic. What we're doing today is we organize cleanups precisely in Java, Indonesia, where now over 2,000 fishermen are involved. And as bycatch, they get plastic out of the ocean and bring it ashore, where we can bring it into suitable recycling chains. The PET part out of this plastic is then produced into our products, and we are looking forward to using other plastic types in the future as well. We have, besides that, a real holistic approach. So we're also setting up structures on land, waste management structures on land, in order to prevent plastic from going into the ocean. Yeah, we are looking forward to expand these operations in other regions as well. And reason why I'm doing it is that my father's a salesman. He took me sailing when I was quite young, even before I could walk. So that's my connection to the ocean, basically.
That is very interesting to see how you have a connection to the ocean. Young-Jin, would you like to round it up by introducing yourself?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I'm with Phineo, based in Germany, a non-profit think tank and advisory house with a focus on impact-oriented civil society engagement. And there's a broad spectrum of advisory and think tank activities related to giving, corporate citizenship, but also including impact investing, specifically for philanthropists, high net worth individuals, family offices, asset managers. And so before I came to Phineo, I was with corporate VC, management consulting. Yeah, and I'm somehow glad that I found a way into a purpose-driven job, if you will. And in particular, over the past 2 years, I focused on how to, measure, manage, and drive systemic impact, how to in climate impact investing in particular. Yeah.
That is a very exciting field, and I know from our Imagine 2030 startups, they have a ton of questions for you in that. Right, I do see a number of people just joined. So just briefly again, to optimize your viewing experience for this fishbowl panel, I ask that you turn off your non-video or hide non-video participants. Very simply put, you just go to your video settings on your bottom left-hand corner and then hide non-video participants. This would ensure that you have the optimal viewing experience and only see our people that have their video on. If you have any questions or a question at hand, please just raise your hand and our tech team in the background will get to you and answer those questions. I do believe, though, they will also put the settings for this exact to get the non-hide or to hide your non-video participants. They will put that in the chat so that you can always check up on that one. Right, well, I think it's time we get going, and I will start off with the very first question directed at all of our three speakers. What does impact mean? It's a big word. It means, I think, a lot for different people. In your terms, Frederic, I'll give you the first question. What does impact mean for you, and how is it represented in On Purpose?
Thank you. Well, first of all, having an impact means to have an effect on something or someone. So just generally, so when we use the term impact in our sector or organizations, most of the time, what we mean is the impact or effect that our activities produce on the environment, on society, and so on. So this can be either negative or positive. So knowing more about the impact we have helps us in finding a strategy to reduce negative impact, such as CO2 emissions, for example, and to maximize the positive impact of our activities on the other hand.
That is a very interesting approach and way to think about it. Ben, do you feel the same way? Or is there any difference in the way you see impact?
No, of course, I would agree. Besides that, for me, it's yeah, making an impact is just about starting also in the first place to just get going and yeah, create something of value for the planet, for society, and get going together with others. I think that's what I want to add from my side to that, maybe.
Great to hear. Young-Jin, as a think tank, how do you view
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot that Frederic said and Ben elaborated on. So in my own words, I always think about it as a change over time that is caused by an intervention or activity. So you can measure it between 2 times, right? But there are some, if you really want to be accurate with your impact measurement, there's some effects or side effects to consider. So oftentimes there may be unintended side effects, right? So you want to take the whole range of your consequences, the consequences of your activities into account. Then there may be some kind of drop-off effect, right? So even after you have measured a change, further down, sometime later, you may find out that actually it didn't last a long time, right? So that's another aspect to take into account. And most importantly, you want to measure it against the counterfactual. So you want to at least estimate what would have happened otherwise, right? If you were not there or if the activity didn't take place, so that you have an idea of your actual causal contribution, because otherwise might be the case that a lot of the change that you're measuring is, some kind of driven by other trends, for example. But what's making it even more complex is when you think about collective impact, where several, agents are working towards the same goal, and collectively they increase, for example, political pressure, and somehow then policy regulation comes into play, and you cannot trace it back to a single organization or a citizen who they all collectively contributed to that impact. And finally, at a systemic level, or you can differentiate between these kind of indirect and direct impacts. And there are impacts that I find particularly interesting where you somehow change the way the system works or the game is played, changing the rules of the game, because that actually across the whole system, so system-wide, you're able to change the behavior of many organizations at once. Otherwise, what we see in ESG investing, for instance, or when you are engaged as a shareholder in a company, you can only work with one company at a time, and it's not going to be a very efficient process when we don't have much time left with regard for the climate crisis, for example.
Those are a lot of very interesting topics, and I think I definitely want to dive in on each and every one of those, especially the side effects all the way to the collective impact that one can have. But I already see we have one question from one of our audience members, Christina. Would you like to ask your question next? Maybe turn on your video and give us
Yes.
a run for their
Hello.
money.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for this great format, and thanks to all of you for being there to answer our questions. I'm Christina from Clean Ocean Coatings, and our mission is to free the oceans from these toxic self-eroding coatings from ships, from the shipping industry. So I see we maybe have the same vision, Ben, and I do have a very specific question to you, because from what I know is that the lipophilic toxins in the ocean, they accumulate in ocean plastics. So how do you make sure that the plastic for your backpacks is safe to use, actually? Or do you know anything on this side?
Yeah, I know about that, or I know that plastic in general is a base for all different things that are out there in the oceans. What we do is obviously we using laboratories. I don't know how to say it better, and we're looking at what is it safe to wear. Obviously, a backpack is not direct contact to the skin. So there's other regulations as for shirts and stuff like that. But we obviously we make sure in the recycling and cleaning process that the plastics get cleaner through this process, and that then what we use is safe to use. I think that's the best I can answer. Does that make sense, or is there anything is there any follow-up question about that?
I think that does make quite a lot of sense. I'd actually have a follow-up question based on that. All of you communicate the way you have impact in one way or another. And as you already said, Benny, that there is a lot of research that goes into or behind how you present that. And on your websites, you have different cases. I know from On Purpose, you say how many successful placements you've had. In the case of Gotbag, you communicate how much plastic you actually save from the ocean when you buy or purchase one of your bags, and so on and so forth. How do you guys make sure or measure the type of impact? Is there specific metrics that you follow that says, okay, this ticks off the impact measurements? Because as you, Young-Jin, have also said, it's a very broad spectrum. How do you go about that and make sure that that is actually managed? I don't know, Young-Jin, would you like to answer this question first?
Yeah, just so to make sure that I understood correctly, you're asking how the unintended side effects are managed properly. Yeah. I mean, it requires a lot of, I would say, upfront analysis, that you are aware of what can potentially go wrong, and over time continuously take stock of what's happening, try to take all stakeholders that into account that come to mind. But of course, you may have overlooked something, right? So you have to be somehow open to outside information coming in or new information arising. But then it's a matter of risk management, right? You have to see it as there are different types of impact risks. Besides that, the impact that you have envisioned doesn't materialize, right? Or you maybe have been wrong in the first place with your theory of change. You have to update your theory of change then to learn as a learning organization. But there are some risks, including these unintended side effects or displacement effects, are different names for it, or different aspects. And you can mitigate, or you need to have a mitigation strategy in place for those risks that you have identified, so you can take some safety measures or have some contingency plans in place. Yeah. So this is a general answer. I hope it's still helpful, but it depends on the particular situation, where I think, especially for startups, usually there's not too much that I would see could go wrong, but especially with bigger corporations, the stakes are much higher.
That makes perfect sense. Frederic, do you have a different perspective or have anything to add to this from an on-purpose perspective?
Yeah, I think that was already gave us quite a good picture. What I want to highlight is the importance of measuring data, qualitative and quantitative data, from the beginning. I know that many organizations, especially in the social sector, are busy enough with just providing their services and operating a functional and financially stable organization. But if you do not start to collect data from the beginning, you will have difficulties to really find out about what the effects of your work are, and then also the development of where you're going to go to. So I think even if it doesn't have to be perfect from the very start, I think thinking about impact is very important for a founder.
Yeah, Ben, go ahead.
Maybe I can go right away, because yeah, absolutely. I think Frederic is absolutely right. I can tell from my experience, to be absolutely frank, in the first place, we were just making sure to get plastic out of the ocean, how to set up the structures, building a team, all of that. So we were quite busy just focusing on our main impact. And now, as we get more mature, we now also collaborating with Plan A, for example, who you guys I think all know, like looking at the whole supply chain. How can we optimize transportation ways? How can we get closer the cleanup activities together with the place of production and stuff like that. So I think it's absolutely right that when you get more mature and it's important to start in an early stage to focus on the impacts you have as a business and a more holistic approach.
I think what you all touched on there, it's very interesting that it is something that you started off with from the very beginning, or with that idea in mind. But it was not something that had to encompass all spheres of your business, if I've understood you correctly, or was that a goal already? Okay, we are going to be impact orientated from every little department within our companies. Or was it, okay, we're going to just orientate ourselves on one concept first and then gradually process or grow out into the various different fields? Ben, Frederic, Young-Jin, I'll leave it to anyone to answer that question.
I think ideally in your business plan, you have an impact strategy in place, right? And that requires that you have done a proper analysis of the problem that you want to address. I saw in the chat there was a question about what are the theory of changes actually. So I would really recommend taking a systems thinking approach. Looking, it's a great practice. Lots of information about it on the internet. What you do is you try to do a root cause analysis of the problem. Different factors contribute to it, but you want to create something like a causal model, where you have all the different causalities mapped out, and then you try to identify the points where you want to make a difference, the leverage points. So for me, theory of change is really the causal model, which are the assumptions about the root causes, which are, there's symptoms and root causes. And if you go deeper and deeper, you will find oftentimes that there's a variety of different, parallel causes, that are all contributing. Maybe there's some are more important than others, but it's an important exercise because it shows you what assumptions you have made, and over time, as you as your product or service is tested in reality, you will find maybe some of these assumptions were wrong or need to be updated, or maybe you are not addressing the most powerful leverage point, right? So, but it just provides you with a basis to, from which you can also then define what your product or service should really tackle, for example. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Before I ask you exactly how this metric in your mind actually looks like, because I think it can be quite an abstract way of looking at something, I do want to just note that we have had a few participants join us now, audience members. You are all actively encouraged to ask your questions. All you need to do is raise your hand, and then tech team in the background will note in the chat who would be next to ask their question. And you have 1 minute or the floor for 1 minute to do exactly that. But maybe back to you, Young-Jin. Is there any way or any recommendation of how this metrics looks like when measuring impact, or is it very case specific?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in general, there's some guidelines for what good metrics should look like, right? This SMART guideline, perhaps, right? There should be, I don't know, measurable time. You should have some kind of duration in it, right? It should be attributable and so on. But I mean, it should be something in the end that is relatively clear and showing progress, and it's aligned to the outcomes, right? So it's relatively closely aligned to the particular change you want to see. Of course, it's not always possible, so you have to get as close as possible, as reasonable too, because it can become more costly if you want to really measure impacts or outcomes. I think once you start, for example, I think, Ben, you can also talk about it, right? I mean, it's much easier for an organization to measure its outputs, what it does, right? And then when you want to find out what is happening afterwards, with the target groups you're working with or in the environment, you need an additional exercise, right? But ideally, your metrics are closer to real world impacts, right, and changes as close as possible.
Very interesting, Ben. I know that was directed at you. Is it any different with GotBag if you're now communicating more on a finished product?
Sorry, I need to again understand, like, what was the question like? Sorry.
No worries. I think Young-Jin, you'll be able to explain this a bit better than I do. But obviously, if you're looking at a matrix as a whole, and when you're now saying to your end consumer, okay, you've saved XYZ amount of plastic from the ocean by buying or purchasing your product, that is very much end consumer related. When you're looking at it from the internal perspective, how does that differ? For example, when you're speaking to your employees or so.
Okay. I think, yeah, internally, speaking for our company, obviously it's important to communicate actually in the same manner. I mean, everybody in the team is motivated by doing what they're doing. So communicating about how many tons of plastic we have recovered each month is a key driver for everybody to do what they're doing. And also side effects we are seeing is when talking about additional impacts that in the area where we're active, region of Demak in central Java, what we see now is that the fishermen are a huge multiplier at over 2,000 people that are involved, and that they go into their families, to their communities, and they talking about the project they're involved with, and then people starting to understand, okay, there's something about plastic which is not good for our lives, for the environment that we live in, and then that's when we see change happening, and that's when we see impact happening. Is that then because from ground up, a lot of people talking about it, they're going to the governments, they're going to the local representatives, and they want to see change happening. They want to see a waste management system getting in place, and that's where we see actually by now our biggest impact. So that then would be a side effect which was not intended by ourselves in the first place. So that's just came by chance actually. So.
Yeah, just wanted to comment. Maybe I think in your case it's relatively easy to measure the outcomes, but I also see, and I really liked what I heard, that it's important to make sure that you also continue to lobby governments, right, or to continue to do these extra stuff that actually doesn't have much to do directly with your business model, but it's an important part of your mission, right, to be engaged in advocacy and lobbyism as a corporate citizen.
No, absolutely. I totally agree. I think, as I said, by now that's where we see actually our biggest impact, because structures and things need to be changed on land. What we recover is a drop in the ocean. It's and we know about it. There's so much more that needs to be done. But it's a start, and as I said, yeah, the structures and the mindset that's changing on land that's what's the biggest impact for us.
I mean, starting a movement right there, and that is just very exciting. Having said that, we've got two people that would very dearly like to ask a question, one of which is my amazing colleague, Tristan. He is also the project lead for the Imagine 2030 Accelerator program. Tristan, the floor is yours.
Thanks for the nice introduction, Taylor. First of all, to all three of the people sitting in our panel, we're really happy to have you here. It's really interesting. I think it's really interesting and cool for our startups as well. So basically what we do at Imagine, we talk a lot about impact, right? All of the startups in our program have the mission to create impact with their products. So my question I have for all three of you is, like, do you have any practical tips for early stage startups? How do they develop a system to measure impact? I mean, obviously they don't have a huge budget. So how do you do it in a maybe non-scientific and pragmatic way? That would be the first question. The second question would actually be, how much effort should they spend on it, right? In terms of time, but also in terms of money, because we all know that this topic is really important as well, but especially if you're an early stage startup, then you don't have unlimited resources, right? In terms of time, but of course also in terms of money. So that would be my two questions to all three of you, and I'm very much looking forward to hear your perspective on that.
Two fantastic questions, Tristan. And I think we can get very different perspectives here. Frederic, why don't you lead us into these answers?
Gladly. It is not really easy to generalize what methodology of impact measurement a certain organization should take or incorporate in its first steps, because it's much dependent on what their services are or what their aims are. But I hope it's okay if I do some advertising. I would recommend everyone to check Phineo's Kursbuch Wirkung, which is free of charge actually online and in different languages available. And you can get a quick overview about some very simple ideas about how impact is part of what you do and how you can take certain steps or evaluate certain steps of your actions.
I'm posting a link and then another link to the impact management project, which is also a great resource. So maybe both in combination.
I love the zebra spirit of everyone helping each other out here in this chat. Ben, Young-Jin, would you guys also like to say something to this topic?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, as Frederic said, I think it varies so much from startup to startup, from business to business. I think it's so different. Maybe talking about our approach, I think, as I said in the first place, we were really focusing on ocean plastic, on a primary impact there. And then as we grew, as we had more funds available, so I also have to say that we bootstrapped, so we don't had investors on board, or that and we still are. Yeah, we still don't have any investors on board, so we just with the company getting bigger and bigger, the more money, the more funds were available, the more we invested into structures, the more we invested into also third-party companies that could help, becoming member of B Corp and things like that. So we just, I would say, to put it together in a nutshell, we just did it bit by bit, piece by piece, and getting a more holistic approach to the impacts that we create in total as a company.
As you grew towards more that holistic approach, looking back now, would there be something that you would have done differently in terms of impact?
No, I think, yeah, it's hard to say, because I think everything was as it was at the time, and we took the decisions as we did in the time. We also in your question, Tristan, was the availability of workforces is in the first days and the first years is everybody is so overwhelmed with work and need to focus on the core, obviously. So I wouldn't say that there's something completely different I would do today. Obviously, yeah, looking back, there's always things we could have done earlier and better and quicker and faster and more of. But I think, yeah, by now we're on a good track. We have more people now on the team who can focus on supply chain, on sustainability topics. And yeah, we're getting better and better with that. So it's fine by now.
I think Ben's case shows how dynamic it is, and oftentimes, you know, I agree that the priorities are first in the early stage on survival and stabilization, right? I mean, you have you can't really spend too many resources on impact measurement. So I would say I would really recommend to front load this analysis, the activities, so that as part of your business plan, you know what your impact goals are for 5 years ahead and how you want to measure them. But then as you start operating, you know, there's not much to measure anyways, right? So after a few years, it really starts to become more and more important. If you do have some spare resource, you can already start practicing in, you know, the first few years perhaps. But really the priorities are just, you know, growing and reaching a stable phase.
Very, very interesting things indeed. Tristan, does this answer your question?
Yeah, I think I got a good idea, and I'm totally aware of the fact that you cannot generalize, right? I mean, you really need to look at what is the startup actually doing, and then you can basically define some KPIs to actually measure the impact as well. But would you guys have some general tips or general thoughts about the discussion which goes in the direction, do you need to measure impact in terms of numbers, right? I mean, there are a lot of people are actually saying you need to make sure that you can actually measure it in terms of numbers. And there are also a lot of people who are saying, okay, impact is really hard to define in numbers and figures. So what would you guys say about that?
I think that if you're collecting data, it's easier if you can collect quantitative data than qualitative data, although you should be aware of the implications of it. So quantifying qualitative data is a challenge actually often, and there are some methodologies like the SROI, the social return on investment, where impact is presented in equivalence of currencies. For example, investing €1 in a social program fighting unemployment against a certain group, resulting in saving the state €3 worth of unemployment spendings. This is the very fairly simple example of how that methodology works. But of course, the critics of these methodologies highlight that these do not work well for all social aspects, and there are risks of comparing and benchmarking against other programs that seem more profitable for a donor. So this concept of effective altruism, I think, for me, first of all, especially at the beginning, impact measurement is something that is very important internally. For me, for my organization, for my team. And so I think what kind of data you're collecting, you should collaboratively decide upon. And then when it comes to outside funders, donors, and everything, they will also have their ideas of what they would like to see as data.
I would even
That is very interesting.
Sorry,
yeah, go ahead.
So in general, I think to me it's not too difficult to translate a qualitative change metric into a scale from 1 to 5 or 1 to 7. You have to define which of these levels, how you understand them. But so you operationalize the qualitative aspect into a scale, right? So that allows you to calculate an average and see how that develops over time. But it's, of course, has its limitations. And I am aware that there's cases where I think people really struggle to measure impact, for example, with regard to awareness building. This is a typical case. And there's what I recommend is looking into the discipline of empirische Sozialforschung, empirical social sciences, where I think there's a lot of tools that they are using for their research. Maybe something can be used, but in general, awareness building is challenging. Same with systemic impact. Although there, I think everything you can observe which happens in the real world, or like a policy change, is observable, and you can work towards it. And what I think is difficult to do, but you can get a sense of it, is the likelihood, the probability that the policy change will happen, the quality of the policy change, whether it includes everything that you wanted to. And if this improves over time because you're building more pressure from civil society, so you can make at least some estimates about it.
I think those are all very, very interesting points. We do have a number of questions in the chat. So Tristan, I think if you have any further questions, we'll just leave them in the chat and we can post them on. But I'd like to give the floor to Patrick from Classic World. Hi, Patrick. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for great input. It was very interesting. And I think I have another challenge, and it's kind of the tangibility of impact. I mean, we are working, like Plastic is working in Thailand, and it's avoiding plastics. So it's avoiding single-use plastic bottles. And for us, in the end, for example, we avoid them to end up in the landfill. But this also means that you might actually cut the stream for recycling, but also there's a certain amount of bottles which go to the ocean. So it's a very kind of complex thing, and it's very hard to figure out what's the actual impact of cutting the plastic bottle. I mean, I can say, okay, I cutted 10 tons of plastics, but what happened actually afterwards? It's super hard to figure out the system behind it. And you guys mentioned that kind of the root cause analysis is a thing, but it's super hard because I mean, I can't explain a person in one island that it's your bottles because they're telling me that that's the bottle of the other island. So how do I actually make this impact tangible to the people who are in the system?
Are you substituting the bottles with glass bottles?
Yes,
or
multi-use bottles.
Yeah, multi-use bottles. I suppose, so maybe just, I don't want to say too much, but one good example that I often look at is emissions, right? And emissions avoidance, emissions removal. When you look at the voluntary carbon market, and there are a lot of standards that have been developed in order to be very accurate in how to show, provide the evidence how much emissions you actually avoided, and then it has to be independently verified and so on. But it gives you maybe some idea. But yeah, I think this is about storytelling. In your case, it's about making some assumptions about how many plastic bottles over a certain use time your glass bottles substitute, and you add it up, and I think it's just based on your assumptions, you claim that you have avoided the use of so many bottles, and then the further assumption is that then maybe so many less bottles have been produced, which is challenging, of course, and maybe the production overall of bottles didn't decline as much, but it's reasonable to assume at least that consumption behavior has changed, and at least in the for the user, it's very clear that the consumption of plastic bottles has reduced. So I think that the story is there. Maybe we can follow up later on if there's particular challenge with the communication. But yeah, maybe Ben, you can also.
Yeah, I think so. Also, part of the question was in which way your system then is replacing the current system, and how to deal with it in the future. And I think yeah, we experiencing, as I said, kind of the same thing. I mean, waste management. Obviously, there is some sort of waste management in place, and in Indonesia and all places of the world, like there are waste pickers, not particularly in the area that we operate, but and that's one question we also question ourselves a lot of times, like what is the impact we have on this whole ecosystem in general, and how can we measure, how can we make sure that we are on the right track, and that we are not interfering with a local market, and how is our structure then affecting that? So it's a good question that you have for your startup Classic there. But
again, yeah, that's also
it's really hard to measure, because I think you always with whatever you're doing, you're touching on so many points, and there's always some change happening on a bigger picture. So there's I think you can ask yourself endless questions about it, and you can go deeper and deeper. And I think as I said, you have to start, and you have to go away and try to measure as much as possible in a way, and ask the right question at the time. Yeah, you
just maybe one remark, if I may. So I think this is why it's so important to look at real world outcomes. So at collective real world, so ideally you would assume that the volume of waste overall, is going to decline due to your activity, and with emissions we can see it at a global level. But this should be the goal, and this is why oftentimes I think it can feel like you have little impact, right? If you're a relatively small startup, you don't see a dent there, or maybe, for the particular region, and this is then your win. But just wanted to emphasize, real world impacts at the collective level where you would expect to see something. Otherwise, you would really think about, are you doing are you looking at the right leverage point? And if you go with systemic change, you're on the safer side, because your impact is wider, even though it's more difficult to achieve.
I think that's a great thing. Even if your impact is little, collectively it is huge. Having said that, we have quite a number of questions. You, jury or speakers, are on hot demand tonight. Next up, we have René. René, would you like to turn on your camera? There we go.
Hi, everybody.
It's yours.
Hey.
Hi, Young-Jin. By the way, thank you. I think it's a very interesting panel, and by the way, very interesting questions. So I think the demand is huge. And my question comes from my background as an impact angel investor. And basically, I fully agree that at least the methodology and all the thinking what is behind, for instance, the impact management project, and especially the what I think thematically is very good. The Wirkung lernen from Phineo is a very good thing. But basically, I work with very early startups, so from pre-seed to seed stage, especially, and I have to say they all want to measure, really, for themselves, because you can't. I always say, if you can't manage what you can't measure. And basically you need to do that. And basically also, I have to say, and I have to admit, this is also something which you could advertise, because it's basically, if you measure that and if you show what you're doing good, it's not only saying we're doing good, we're saving plastics or whatever. If you put a number on that, I think it's easier to get investors. But the problem is, I started pointing out, I look at the impact management project. There you find all the information that's necessary. And then they downloaded that Excel sheet. You know that? You're smiling, Young-Jin. And basically they were lost. They were calling me and said, no, basically that's for corporates, but not for startups. So basically it's huge, even to say that not only the 5 dimensions, as I said, the methodology behind it is very good, but even to fill out the 5 dimensions and scientific data and indicators and everything is much too much for them, at least. But now to my question, and especially to you, how to onboard them, how to onboard these very young companies towards this methodology, because I think it's good, but it's much too much.
Yeah,
that is a big question.
Just need to create a startup-friendly, simplified version, and then build it up. But maybe you start, and I think you're doing this already. In the early stage, just start with one KPI, the most important one, maybe, and just look at, 5 things, instead of 15 that maybe help you alongside. Actually, I just a startup-friendly version of the IMP would be perhaps a nice thing to develop. It doesn't exist yet, as far as I know.
We're working on that.
Yeah.
But from maybe a perspective of you, Frederic, has there ever been a challenge where you thought, okay, we are too small to handle that? Or have you just tackled it all?
No, not at all. Of course, we are a very lean, small organization, so resource is a question for us as well. And we did, in the early stages of our organizations, that was before my time actually, we tried to get help from outside. So we had somebody, for example, doing his master's thesis, and he was developing an impact assessment for us. We found out later that this was only suboptimal because that person left again, and then the structure was there, but it wasn't implemented in the teams, and so we did it differently. We set up an international working group from all our cities that we operate in. Currently, 3 cities: Berlin, Paris, and London, and we have developed our own assessment. So that works for us much better, and it's kind of the resources are split amongst our organization, and that's easier for us.
That's actually good advice, Frederic. Maybe also to the question that Tristan had earlier is how to get going with impact measurement in the first place is to collaborate with student organizations and master students. We did it. We also did that a lot, and that helped actually. For example, with the B Corp assessment, we have done it that way, and then a follow up maybe. It's coming to my mind now is as soon as possible to hire somebody full-time that can be in charge of your whole sustainability approach. That would be more to Tristan's point earlier, actually a little bit later now, but I think it's important because, as I said, it's so easy. Your team is overwhelmed all the time, and to bring somebody on board who has the ownership of it and is able to have the communication with the third-party platforms and whatever measurement tools you use. I think that's really important when you start out.
So start with a Werkstudent, maybe then part-time role and then full-time role after some time.
No, because absolutely what Frederic said, it's the pain, when you have a student and he's on board for just a short period of time, and then it doesn't help in the long run, obviously.
Very interesting approach to tackle on from university and then take them on. But I think it's also reinventing roles altogether, something that many companies maybe never have thought of at such an early stage, at least. Before we dive into further questions, Renee, do you have anything else that you still want to ask?
I just want to say thank you. And basically, my gut feeling is right. At the moment, you can't get away from, let's say, external consulting, whether it's a Werkstudent or something else, because you need to concentrate on what you're doing when you're early stage. Okay, but basically we're working on that, as I said, and thank you very much for the answers.
Thank you.
Definitely. Awesome stuff. Well, I think next up we have Lucy, followed then by Ian. Lucy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Actually, my question has been answered a little bit, thanks to Renee, who also just got back on that, because we are a pre-seed early startup. We want to establish an after-sales ecosystem for cargo bikes to help them come into mass market, because it's a very hard issue of after-sales. Everything that happens after somebody buys a bike, nobody cares anymore, but it's actually, it affects the decision to buy one. And our impact, of course, is the substitution of cars. And this is something that we find hard to put a number on, because this is something that you have learned in many interviews, but has not been researched. So this is, So, okay, thank you for the tip with the master student, but still this is for us hard to do, even though it sounds, easy. But I have one other question then. I understand you need facts, but I also get that it's also about storytelling, because from our perspective, it's not internal at the moment, but external, right? So maybe to your experience, for example, a impact investor, how much of it is storytelling? How much of it is fact? Because this is, I think, anytime we talk to somebody, it's always like, oh, not enough storytelling. So we have the feeling, I don't know, even though we've been talking about facts today a lot, that it's actually storytelling that people need. Could you maybe have some comments on that, and how, maybe a tip, or also very specific tip how to handle this as a pre-seed early startup?
Yeah, my immediate thought is that there are different types of impact investors. Some are more sophisticated and they want to do a deep dive and really have some confidence in the impact, and they want to see that impact is also satisfying at a satisfying level for them, right? And then of course storytelling plays a role, which I think depends on the personality, whether you're more like an emotional person or you're, I mean, everyone likes storytelling in general. Some are more susceptible to it, I would say, than others, right? So depends really on the person you have in front of you, but it must be supported by facts. That would be my advice. Otherwise, it will quickly create the impression that it was like more a shallow story, not the fact-based story, and then the quality drops, or the perception of the story drops, I would say.
But you do experience that talking to your impact investors, it is really a big part of the story, isn't it? Yeah.
The impact story or the impact narrative, it's a big motivation why they are doing it at all, right? So they want to have them make a difference with the capital that they deploy. And so, but based on personal preferences, some might really like the idea or like the impact that you offer. Others might say, oh, what else is there that I can, because they always think about the opportunity costs and have usually lots of deal flow. So they want to make the best choice, right? Create the most impact with the capital that they have available.
Maybe we should get René back on stage. He's an impact investor. Maybe
yeah, you should connect with him afterwards.
Yeah, but now to add to that, I as I said, we are bootstrap. I don't have much experience in raising capital rounds and talking to investors. I know from friends and in my through network to other startups that I talk to, that there are definitely impact investors who are fact driven. For example, Planet A, the Fridtjof is doing the fund. I know they, for a fact, they're looking really precisely at the numbers. They're looking at the scientific data behind every startup. They're looking what's going on there. So I wouldn't say necessarily that that's all about storytelling, but I think storytelling is always a part of company and what you provide.
Okay. Well, I think MintWorks is off to a great start in terms of storytelling. At least you've done quite well so far.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for an amazing question. Are you satisfied with the answer, Lucy? I suppose you are, since you've turned your video off. Having said that, for all those of you that, just like our next candidate, Ian, who's asking our question, Ian, you can turn your video on in the meantime. Want to ask a question, please just raise your hand and our tech team in the background will be sure to put on the speaking order in the chat. At the same time, I'd just like to point your attention to what Renee posted recently in the chat from Loompact, all about onboarding to impact measurement. I'm sure it's a great thing to take a look at. Ian, are you ready to ask your question?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
We can. Thank you.
The video host has my video blocked, so otherwise I would be happy to show myself.
No, that's terrible.
All right, that's
How
right.
dare they?
Oh, there we go. Here we go. Nobody good. I'm starting now. Just a second. Start my video. Great. Okay. Hi guys.
Hi, Ian.
Hi guys. Hi guys. Thanks for having this platform. It's very interesting. I just say I come from a completely different world from new impact and green startups, because I work and represent global brands in the consumer electronics business. So I find green business quite interesting. I've met Benny a couple of times on this, and I hope my question is relevant. Is that I'm trying to figure out, is the motivation for in the green area, is the motivation for the products, when people come with an idea for product, is it because they're coming with a great product, or is it becoming that they want to make an impact? That's my first question. And the second part of that question would be, and is it possible to really scale a green company, a green startup? Is it really possible to scale that without having a negative impact on your values in the green area for the environment? Whoever wants to try and answer that, go ahead. So it's open to any one or all of you on the platform. Thanks.
I think the question is perfect for me, right? So I will go first. First part of the question was which is the starting point, basically. I think yeah, I think that's again completely different. I would say. I can say for myself, we started as a passion, as a side project in the first place. So we saw yeah, when we were out on the waters, saw the impacts of plastic pollution and wanted to do something, wanted to change something. We started at a really small scale, linking up with people, like-minded people at the time, and out of that, as a side business, as a side hustle in the first place, all of a sudden we're running into building a company and yeah, scaling that further. So I think obviously by now there's such a high demand for green products, for sustainable products, and I think more and more people are jumping on that train. Obviously, I think there's a lot going on in this regards as well. So I think it's not there's not a one answer to it. I think it's completely different from all of the time. Is it possible to scale a green business? I would say yes, it is, and I think what goes along with it, and that's what I can see now, is that the more you grow, the more impact you can generate and the more you can do. Like when we started out in the first year, maybe we recovered 120 tons. Last month alone, we recovered 60 tons. Just to give you a sense. So we are now able to building a trash boom in Ganges during that year, which we can fund by ourselves, stuff like that. So I would definitely say it is possible. I mean, maybe from time to time you have to adapt the way you do so. We have to change our operations. We have to expand them. We have to go to other settings, other locations as well, and expand the cleanup activities there. But I think it is possible to scale. For us, what obviously is complex is the supply chain behind that. So there's just a long period of time it takes us to recover the plastic, recycle it, build a product from that. That is giving us a hard time. Obviously, it's more complicated, I would say, in some cases to scale, but it is definitely possible.
Okay, thanks, Ben. That's a good answer. Don't know if anyone else has a story behind that.
I think I'd agree to what Ben said. It's quite different motivations that drives people to be an entrepreneur. One of the classic definitions of social enterprise would be that someone has a social or an environmental challenge and they want to tackle it with entrepreneurial means. But I think there's a wide spectrum of the drivers and motivations behind starting a business. And I think there are some examples, even if the social impact scene and social enterprise scene in Germany is, for example, much smaller than in the UK, which is, I guess, more or less Europe's biggest and experienced market there. But for example, I don't know if you've heard of Ecosia. It's an alternative search platform to Google. It's now Europe's biggest alternative to Google with only 1% market share, but that's the biggest to Google as it gets. But they're around now for a few years and they've evolved a lot. And they, from the outside perspective, is that they are very they put much focus on their own principles and values, and they try to also evaluate them and bring them to life. And I think important is that you also are open that things can change, and that you are in constant discourse with your teams about that, because values are not set in stone either. They can change, and depending on how you manage that process, they can still remain true to your core.
Great.
Yeah, just adding to this quickly, perhaps, over the next 30 years or so, or 50, you will see the largest industrial transformation in history, right? If we are really getting our act together, what's missing is carbon pricing. We will hopefully see steep and growing carbon pricing. So if you take this together, you can assume that every activity that contributes to decarbonization is going to, create a huge business case, hopefully. So yeah. So in this regard, if you're really aligned with that mission, I wouldn't worry.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Thank you, Ian, for a great question. Next up, we have Patrick. You would like to ask another question?
Yes, indeed. Thanks a lot. So we were talking about impact investing, and I was wondering, and that's maybe also to you, Ben, because to me, impact is always kind of something costly. I mean, we as impact entrepreneurs, we take a portion of our profits to make impact with it. And for example, you, I mean, with your cleanups, that's kind of part of your supply chain. So you're taking a considerably higher amount of costs into account to make your product. And I was wondering how much costs for impact are reasonable to kind of still be competitive or attractive for impact investors. So kind of what's the best trade-off? I mean, especially, for example, for a growing company, obviously you would like to put everything into growth, but you're actually doing everything for impact. So what's the best trade-off?
Yeah, again, sorry, I'm not an expert for investors on the investor side, as we bootstrap, as I said before. But I think, yeah, absolutely. And to more generally speaking, I think in the end, it just needs to make sense still. I mean, it obviously, as you said, the production price and what we are doing aside the core supply chain, meaning getting plastic out of the ocean and recycling it. We're doing other stuff as well, and we do have like a fixed amount which we want to contribute to other things during the year as well. That's according to what revenues we generate. But I would say what helps you on the other hand maybe is that by now I would say as an impact startup, I have the feeling that you have also a lot of advantages in the moment. You attract good people to your company, people that are really well educated, but really motivated, intrinsically motivated, which helps your company, and that's a huge driver for your business as well. So you have to, on the other hand, I totally agree, you have to bear these costs, and in the end you have to stay competitive. You need to make, as a company, you need to make a profit and to be able to invest and to scale. So I would say, yeah, try to be profitable still, whatever you do. But on the other hand, I just wanted to highlight that I hear the question, or I heard the question a couple of times, and it's absolutely true and it's valid. But I just want to highlight also the advantages that you have, and to be able to promote what you're doing, attract good talent in the moment, because more and more people, as Jung said before, there's a shift happening, and I can see it. Like in every interview I have, people say, I love what you're doing. I'm all in for it. I wanna work for you, and that's a huge it's a huge advantage that you have. And maybe to answer it that way, and maybe the others can follow up on what profits is still doable.
So Patrick, I would say on the demand side, you should be able to charge somewhat higher prices so that your margins are, maybe you can compensate a bit with
That's
the
also,
increasing willingness to pay for impact products. And then, but investors in general, or impact investors, don't like trade-offs, even though they are a reality of everyday business. I also agree with that. And so what investors tend to look at is lockstep, right? They call it lockstep, where the correlation between business success and impact growth, or business growth and impact growth is high. So ideally, in the ideal world, you wouldn't have to sacrifice costs for growth. But so finding this right balance, there's no right answer, because you have a range of impact investors who are willing to, accept more or less, trade-offs. But in general, I think more on the side that they want to see competitive profit and impact. So your room to maneuver maybe not very high. So, just bearing this in mind. Yeah. Unfortunately, so this might change if we have proper pricing of externalities and so on in place.
Thanks a lot.
Maybe Frederic, on that note, how do you go about balancing, or when you place individuals, teaching them on how to balance this cause for profit? That is quite an intricate balance, and you can't have either one on an extreme. How do you go about that?
Well, when people come to us during their programs, they mostly are experienced from the private sector. So they've been around in corporates or mid-sized companies before. And the social sector is a new spectrum for them. And when they get to learn the organizations that we cooperate and collaborate with, there's a wide range that we want to show them. So we have classical philanthropic and charity organizations that they can work with. On the other side, we have social startups such as Soul Bottles or Wild Plastic or something like that. And we have classical organizations that have maybe in their CSR department projects that people can engage with that come to us. So it is not for us to tell them what is a good proportion or what's really purposeful and a good purposeful work for them, but it's for them to find out. So we want to show them the whole range and just guide them along and give them the possibility to learn a lot about different organizations, different values in organizations, and then come to their own conclusion what they feel works well for them. And what is really interesting now coming to our own impact measurement is that we, of course, we use surveys to evaluate the people that go through our programs. So the last survey, for example, showed that our alumni, around 80% of them feel that their values are aligned with their professional activities now. And this is 2 years out of the program. So they've, most of them have really found a good, equilibrium there.
That's great to hear that there's also then such a balance, which also leads me maybe to my next question. In terms of On Purpose and the company itself, I know you've listed, if I'm not mistaken, as a non-profit organization. The same goes for Phineo. Was that something from the beginning that said, okay, we are for cause by listing as a non-profit, or was there a deeper thought behind that, or alternative thought?
Well, you would have to ask that the founder. I must admit, the founder is Tom, who found the company 11 years ago in the UK as a non-for-profit organization. That's correct. On the other hand, we are an organization worked loosely. So On Purpose Berlin, for example, is a classic GmbH, not a GmbH. So we are for-profit here, but since our the limited in UK is a non-profit organization and we are 100% owned by them, we kind of operate and see ourselves as a non-for-profit here as well. It has implications on what you do, and I think the decision of which direction you go is also quite individually, and it's a very important decision. And I remember the first day I was an associate at On Purpose in a program, we we got to hear an inspiring talk of Dirk Müller-Remus, the founder of Auticon, which is a social enterprise that brings autistic people into the first market. And he told me about when he found the company, this was a very, very important decision. And they decided to become a GmbH as well, because they wanted their services to be looked upon as very professional services. They offer IT services, which are then being executed by their autistic employees in other corporates and other organizations. And they said, if we would have opted for the GmbH, we would have to talk to the people from the CSR department and about their responsibility ideas, then would get some funding. But as we are operating a professional service, and we get to talk to the people from HR, and we get to talk to people who are really interested in the quality, and they are willing to pay the prices that we also ask, and that's I think something that you really have to be aware of when founding.
There's a very, very interesting aspect that you've touched upon. I think for many young founders that are faced with such a decision, and hopefully one day such predicaments will no longer be a cause for having to make a decision. We do have one last question, or at least time for one last question from our audience members, and this I'd like to give to Ed or Eduardo from Horus Prosthetics, also an Imagine 2030 accelerator. Edo, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for organizing all this. It was really difficult to find a question, but I noticed that, so I am from Peru, and I came to Germany to study engineering, and right now I develop a prosthetic leg for developing countries. This means for people in Africa, South America, that are amputee, so that they don't have a leg, so that they can walk again. And now regarding impact, so I saw that, for example, in Europe, all impact institutions analyze CO2 emissions, plastic use, how much plastic is used. But back into my roots in Peru, it's like nobody care about plastics. It's like if you use plastic, if you use paper, nobody care. When I walk in the street in Peru, there is CO2 everywhere. It's like the city, it's like Sao Paulo, Lima. You only admin looks like you only have CO2 everywhere, like a lot. So nobody care about if it's a lot of CO2 or less CO2. And here is like that. So people give a lot of value to footprint, to plastic use. And my question is, there are real problems, like 80% of amputees live in developing countries, only 1 out of 10. So only 10% of these amputees can walk. So is this also important in like how do you measure this? How do you, for example, if I use less plastic, of course, I am helping to make a better world. But if I make people walk, it's like, it's a little bit more of impact from my side. Is there any, how can I quantify this kind of, so what I am doing? That would be my question.
I think Young-Jin, with your experience, might be best to answer this question.
In general, it's very difficult to offset on net social impact and environmental impact. They are very different categories, you know. But I understand your point. What you can say is that the impact that you create for the specific people that you help is quite high, right, at a qualitative level. So it's a deep impact. Maybe it's not as broad. You don't reach so many people, but it's deep, and it's addressing a problem that is currently affecting these people, whereas environmental impacts are really forward. You know, they're affecting future generations, or you know, or some of them at least, the climate crisis and so on. So this is where the beneficiaries are future generations who will also suffer a lot if we don't, manage to get this
if you cannot walk, maybe you can also meet anybody else. Maybe you cannot have even children if you don't walk. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, so I would say it all has its justifications, and it's in the end a tough ethical judgment call as well. If if you want to weight them against each other, there are different arguments, and it's so in your particular case, I think you do have a case for people who are particularly empathetic with today's people who are suffering. So you need to find the right ones who care about your issue, and it's an issue that I think a lot of people do care about. And there are other people who care more about the future of humanity or something. So there will be. I see that you will notice in the Western world there has been a shift in perception and awareness, and it's really has become a huge concern. I agree with that because it's the foundation for society that is at stake currently, but we cannot forget what is currently, at a social level, also a problem. Social inequality, human rights, and so on, still have to be addressed as well. So that's making this time so challenging. Sorry, it wasn't. Maybe it couldn't provide a direct answer, but but it's still, what you're doing is still valid, even here. Maybe for us, it's not the less.
You should get in touch with the guys from Amparo. Maybe you know them already.
Yeah, I know them already.
Okay.
But yes, I think, as it's also been said tonight, it is a process. It's not something that one can do all encompassingly or holistically in one step. It is a process, and I think, Frederic, you also mentioned it. It is the little process or the little steps, and collectively it means a lot, and that is exactly what one has to consider. So impact is a broad spectrum. So Edu, thank you for that. Also, just check out in the chat from Sebastian, he's also mentioned a comment for you to check out QALY, quality adjusted life years. That might be a helpful metric for you. On that note, we've come rather to the end. It's gone rather swiftly. I do have one final question for our three speakers, and that being, since you've joined your companies or founded your respective companies, what has been your highlight with a particular focus on impact? Ben, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I think I said it earlier. It was just last month when we were able to recover 60 tons of plastic in 1 month, which was crazy for me. It was really a cool thing. And then besides that, I think which I also already laid out was to see the structure, this whole infrastructure increasing. Like we've now built 3 warehouses and stuff like that. So it's just to see all of this operations and all of that, what we started out so small, now getting bigger and bigger. That's the highlight, I think.
Fantastic achievements for sure, and you should certainly be proud of that. Young-Jin, your highlight.
Yeah, when I think back about when I joined Phineo about 5.5 years ago, impact investing was still in the early stage, and I had very little experience with it. Now it really, you can see how it has picked up, become more and more center stage. And I think for me the highlight is just that I'm glad that I've been part of or with that movement and gained some expertise that I have the impression that I can now share. I hope that we can further accelerate, even because it's not going fast enough, if I ask especially with regard to climate investments and so on. But it's a small step in the right direction, right? So the market is tiny compared to the total sustainable or non-sustainable finance market. So we can play our part, and I see an opportunity in that. So it's my highlight.
Baby steps indeed, but every step is important nevertheless. Frederic, what would be your highlight?
Yeah, and Young-Jin, I wouldn't call it tiny nowadays. Actually, it's growing quite respectably and gaining mainstream momentum. For me personally, since as an organization we work with individuals actually to very intensively to create deep impact on them throughout their programs. So there's not like a single prominent example, but rather the many individual feedbacks we get from our stakeholders, as well as like our participants or organizations. When a purpose startup tells me that the matching with our participant has been a game changer for them in the setting up organizational structures and company culture, or when an associate told me that he had learned so much about himself and found the dream job through joining our program, these are the moments when I get reassured that all the hard work that team puts into running our programs really is worthwhile, and that keeps me motivated each and every day.
I love that. It's always the best when you see your customers or the people you're working with equally as motivated, if not more than you are. On that note, a huge thank you to our audience for fantastic questions, and an even greater thank you to our guest speakers tonight. You guys have been fantastic, and I'm sure everyone here, like myself, have learned a lot from you, ranging from, well, a lot of topics that we actually covered with regards to impact measurement, from how to do it, what to measure, all the way through to the storytelling with regards to impact investors and beyond. On that note, I would also like to invite each and every single one of you to the Imagine 2030 Demo Day, where you can see startups that are in eager pursuit of impact innovations and projects that are hopefully going to create a huge change in society in the near future. So that will happen on the 27th of July. If all goes well, we can do it live and in person in Berlin. Fingers crossed. The numbers are looking in our favor, but if not, it would also be a hybrid event. So you can, more than welcome to join, obviously, on an online basis. On that note, thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening. It's been great. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good evening.
Bye-bye.